History's ultimate blunders. It's a little long, but they could be funny. Have I watched this video? Quick check.
The butterfly effect is a concept in chaos theory which asks the question, to what extent can a deadly torrential hurricane be caused by something as small as an insect flapping its wings several weeks earlier?
No chance, right?
How much of your life is determined by events so disconnected from you that you couldn't possibly trace back to it? There are many examples of fate.
I believe that none of it and every single thing that happens to you is because of the amount of effort you put in, and it's 100% determined. And there is zero luck, and if you are not, like for example, Elon Musk did work billions of times harder than all of us. Poor people are bad people. It feels like weird to say, but yes, if you're poor, you are a worse person because you didn't work as hard and you're probably morally corrupted. There's a direct link. Finally, some truth. Get this man a Republican nomination. Nepotism's not real. It's just lucky that the sons of CEOs make great CEOs of their dad's company. That's luck. That's not even luck. That's skill. Wait, my worldview is falling apart. No, it's not even genetic, because that would imply it was out of their hands. It's not genetic. They just happen to work the hardest, but not by luck. You don't get it. Read more, study more. As a poor person, I can vouch for this. So you're saying you're a bad person. You're saying as a poor person, I can vouch that I'm a bad person. All right, cool, thanks. That's awesome. You have confirmed my worldview. And now I have an example. I don't need to learn any more data. History's greatest mistakes.
Famous mistakes throughout history. Russia.
Man, he says Russia. Maybe he'll talk about this. I gotta say, this is a pretty common theme throughout history, but Russia is the source of like every conqueror's mistake. Because they always want to invade it. Just don't do it. Just ignore Russia. Who gives a shit about cold ass, frozen ass, potato filled Russia? Everybody goes into Russia and they blow up their whole shit. That's the most repetitive mistake throughout history.
Selling Alaska to the United States. NASA losing $1 million satellite because some engineers used metric and some used imperial.
That's funny.
Or Blockbuster turning down the offer to buy Netflix. These are fun dinner table facts that are well known to the public.
I mean, Yahoo turned down the offer to buy Google. Fucking dumbass.
But I'm more interested in the invisible walls that trap us, built by mistakes so small yet so monumental that most people have no idea that they're even in prison.
And then in 20 years, they're going to make a video about how Atrioc turned down the opportunity to buy Fartcoin. That's exactly right. And it'll be considered one of the greatest blunders of all time. The fact that I missed the Fartcoin train will be, literally everyone else will be generationally wealth. And the fools who thought it was stupid will be under the poverty line.
5 blunders outlined in this video are so unbelievably minor that you'll find it hard to believe how much they've altered the world around us. But once you see them, you'll find them hard to ignore.
Okay. A weatherman destroyed a city, part 1.
It's a cold winter morning on the exposed south-facing gully of the highest mountain in Great Britain. Cambridge student Charles Thomas Rees Wilson is interning at the Ben Nevis Weather Observatory, a permanently staffed outpost providing cloud data in order to perfect the emerging field of weather prediction. It was here that clouds were first documented and described in a
I am no expert, but that won't stop me from opining on weather prediction. But isn't it just, you kind of guess? Don't you just kind of look out at the sky and go, yeah, there's going to be a storm? You know? Just fucking, you just bink it. You just bink it. You feel it in your knees. Don't you just feel it in your bones that there's going to be some rain? Or you kind of just hope tomorrow will be sunny, so you say it's going to be sunny. Like, who checks? Who cares? Just anyone can be a weatherman.
Scientific way. Conditions in the small hut are perishing. Temperatures rarely went above freezing, and the structure was frequently snowed in. But sometimes there were periods of calmness. And on one frosty morning, when the winds and sleet and snow had died down, Wilson stepped out of the dainty shack and stood on the cliff edge. He could see his shadow cast down on the clouds below, and as the clouds parted more and the sun was fully revealed, he saw this.
Oh, circular rainbow? Cinema.
An almost supernatural optical illusion called a glory. It's
called a glory?
Beautiful. Wilson was so mesmerized by the effect that he wanted to know exactly what caused it.
It's called
he
a
wanted
glory
to create a glory
hole-shaped?
for himself. Soon after, he took off back to Cambridge, and by 1911, he had built a device that could create a cloud in a bottle.
He's trying to create his own glory
cloud
hole?
chamber. And the design was simple. So simple, in fact, that you can make one yourself. There's a tutorial on YouTube.
I don't want
Up here, you have a glass container filled with water or alcohol vapor. And the floor of that container is a piston connected to a valve leading to a vacuum
Piston
chamber.
what?
When the valve is opened, air rushes in to fill the vacuum, pulling down the piston and expanding the glass container. The sudden drop in pressure up here creates tiny wisps of clouds. But why? The common belief at the time was that water moisture in the air condensed onto dust particles, creating clouds. But when Wilson cleaned all the dust from the device,
My generation calls these puff bars. It does feel like he's creating the first version of a vape. It does. It feels like he's getting to that.
clouds were still showing up. He wasn't sure where else they could be coming from, so he asked his university colleague, Ernest Rutherford of the physics department, what might be going on. Rutherford suggested X-raying the machine in action to see if radiation had anything to do with it. Recently, it had been proven cosmic rays from outer space are constantly whizzing through the atmosphere, which could have something to do with the formulation of clouds. And when Wilson ran the tests again, the X-rays captured something.
That's not true. Clouds come from when God hits the bong real good, and then they spray out into the sky. That's just day one science. Most people know that. So, I'm Jewish, can vouch. Is that in all religions? I guess that would make sense. Do all religions have some tale of God ripping a huge bong hit and creating clouds? The Lord blew that loud.
Quite remarkable. The inside of the machine was covered with invisible streaks, spirals and circles, and no two X-rays were the same. Wilson took the images back to Rutherford and asked him what they were. "My goodness," said Rutherford. "You're the first person to photograph particles."
Oh shit.
Background radiation was passing through the machine, ionizing the gas particles inside and giving them a positive charge. When the machine was activated, the drop in pressure attracted the vapor to condense onto these charged particles and produce the effect. So there is a link between radiation and clouds. Huh.
Wait, is this going to lead to this guy figuring out something that leads to the nuclear bomb and destroys Hiroshima? Is this... That's not... First of all, that's not a blunder. This is just the evolution of science.
And with that, Wilson stopped using the machine and went back to learning about the weather. But while Wilson was done with his machine, Rutherford was still curious. He showed the photographs to his colleagues. They realized that particle physics was now no longer theoretical. They could use a cloud chamber to actually see particles. They built their own and told all the other particle physicists. For the next 40 years, Wilson's cloud chamber was the scientific standard for viewing particles and radiation, and the leaps and bounds that the study of physics made in that time was monumental. A breakthrough so important that Wilson was awarded the 1927 Nobel Prize in Physics for his contribution to radiation studies, even though he was just interested in clouds. Within 2 years, the first model of the atom was drawn up. By 1927, the first theories of quantum mechanics were published. In 1932, the neutron was proven to exist.
Jimmy Neutron?
A year later, the electron microscope was invented. In 1939, uranium fission was discovered. In 1942, scientists in Chicago would make the world's first nuclear chain reactor. And in 1945, 34 years after building the cloud chamber, Wilson's discovery would create a cloud more devastating than he could possibly have imagined.
The woke mind virus was dropped on Japan.
But this wasn't really a mistake. So he showed the photograph to the wrong person. A wrong path for humanity, maybe. And while the atomic bombings only killed 250,000 people, the opening of the atom has also generated forces that can be used for good, such as radiation therapy or nuclear energy. For that reason, I rank it at the bottom of my 5 big mistakes. It has, so far at least, been the least damaging blunder I will discuss in this video.
That's crazy. So you blame his cloud chamber for the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then it's the least damaging?
Let's hope it stays that way. However, our old pal the X-rays aren't completely innocent. Around the same time, they played their part in a much deadlier mistake.
The woman who knew too much.
Oxford, 1943. The government had a problem.
Workers in
munitions factories were getting sick at an alarming rate. On Mondays, they would come in healthy and fit, but on Fridays, they would be taking frequent breaks due to lethargy.
That's called the work week, little bro. That's called fucking TGIF. Get me the fuck out of here.
Vomiting and nausea. The industry had a high turnover rate at a crucial time during the war, and nobody knew why. Was it because of the TNT? Or was it because the workers were all people too weak to join the army and were thus more susceptible to disease? Hired to solve this problem was a team of statisticians led by Dr. Alice Stewart at the Oxford Institute of Social Medicine,
it's probably that one.
A new field of study focusing on treating the conditions where disease arise, not just the disease itself. Nobody on the team knew anything about the chemical properties of TNT. They were all stats nerds after all, so they took a different approach of creating surveys for each factory worker to fill out.
Stats nerd solution to the problem. Create a bunch of surveys for people to fill out. Shocker! Shocker! Maybe we can solve this with more surveys.
Everything from their diet, lifestyle, living conditions, what shifts they worked at the factory, and what work they actually did. They found that workers on the night...
It was the surveys that were killing them. So our studies show that after 1 week of filling out surveys, they're getting frustrated, agitated. We can't find the source.
Night shift who handled the chemical carbon tetrachloride were most likely to get sick. And if you're a chemist or a medical student, you might be able to guess why. Carbon tetrachloride is very similar to chloroform, the anesthetic. Added to the fact that the windows of the factory were boarded up during the night shift due to blackout restrictions, the vapors were getting trapped in the air and making the workers sick. And the team were able to discover this only through surveying the workers. No chemistry knowledge required. After the war, the Institute fell on hard times. With no more government funding, they had to prove social medicine was a worthy field of study. Those days, the best way to gain notoriety and funding was to tackle one of the big issues of the day: lung cancer, polio, smallpox. All of these were being worked on by other scientists, and the field was overcrowded, so no luck there. But what about leukemia, cancer of the blood? For some reason, leukemia rates were skyrocketing among children, and there was talk of a leukemia epidemic. In 1930, the rate of leukemia in newborn babies in the USA was 180 in 100,000. By 1955, it had more than tripled.
Yikes.
Despite this, the most the Institute could muster for a leukemia study was £1,000 from a private donor. A budget too small to...
£1,000 to solve leukemia? I mean, even with inflation, what is that now? That's probably, I mean, it's probably actually quite a bit. 1930? I bet it's close to $100,000. But it's tough to say. Because isn't a dollar in 1920 something like $800 now? Isn't it that much of a devaluation?
Possibly conduct any meaningful research with.
It's 81,000 pounds. Wow, basically nailed it. And that's in dollars, about 100.
Unless they used the same methods as the factory study. Armed with this tiny budget, Dr. Stewart set off across England, interviewing parents and comparing it with hospital records. For every child cancer death she studied, she would also study one non-cancer death to compare with. The £1,000 grant was spent on train fares and hotel accommodation, and by requesting existing hospital records, she had effectively loaded the cost of the study onto the taxpayer. Within a year, she had visited all 203 health departments in the country and interviewed thousands of mothers about a wide array of subjects. Did you own a dog? Do you eat fish regularly? What about tinned fruits? Does your husband use aerosols at work? Do you take the bus regularly? Nothing was turning up, except in one metric: X-rays. Children who had died of leukemia were 3 times as likely to have been X-rayed in the womb. X-raying pregnant women...
Obviously, the X-rays are red herring, and it's because they got the COVID vax. I've solved it. I skipped it. I figured it out. It's because these children in Britain got the COVID vaccine early. They were vaxxed. They gave them leukemia. I fucking solved it. I cracked the fucking case.
Made the baby 900% more likely to develop leukemia. And in the days before ultrasound, this was basically every child in the developed world. People began to take notice when she published her first set of results in 1956. She was given more funding, this time to check the medical records of Scotland and Wales too. Soon her team was able to trace 80% of all childhood cancer deaths in Britain back to being X-rayed in the womb. Her final report was published in 1958. A child that was X-rayed was twice as likely to die of cancer in the next 10 years, up to 5 times as likely for certain groups. We need to stop X-raying babies immediately. This could have been Nobel Prize worthy. On a budget of £1,000, Alice Stewart and her team had proven something that could save millions of children.
Could have been. But this is 1955? So I feel like there needs to be a man involved of some sort. We're not going to give a Nobel Prize to a woman, right? Like, there's got to be... Perhaps some dude can say the exact same thing, but louder and get credit for it. That would be... And then save all the time on trains. That could be...
Children. Nevertheless, there was opposition. In the form of Richard Doll of the Medical Research Council. The council had been called upon by Parliament to investigate the effect of atomic radiation on survivors of the Hiroshima bombing. Specifically, the frequency of leukemia and other cancers.
Oh, it ties back in?
If anyone knew anything about radiation and cancer, it was Dr. Doll. And he was pretty respected. While Stewart had been travelling up and down the country, he had proven that smoking and asbestos causes lung cancer, which was pretty big news in the 50s. Doll hit back with a study showing the opposite. Low doses of radiation were completely safe at any age. They compared the leukemia rates of children born in Hiroshima after the atomic bombings with the rates of X-rayed children in 8 English hospitals. And leukemia rates were no worse after X-rays than after the atomic bombings. "Oh right, guess she was wrong," said the doctors, and went back to using X-rays on children. This study had flaws though. It only studied born children in 8 hospitals. Quite a small sample size compared to every medical authority in the country, and was only looking for leukemia, not all types of cancers. It only surveyed children up to 5 years old, whereas Alice & Co. studied children up to 10. There was no control group, it was only comparing Hiroshima victims to X-rayed children. By all means, it was an inferior study.
Yeah, but there was something
So why
about
did
it.
everybody believe the Doll study over the Stewart study? Because people didn't want to admit their doctors were wrong. People trust doctors. They're figures of authority. You put your health in their hands. Meanwhile, doctors don't want to admit they're hurting people. They become doctors to do the exact opposite. One letter from a radiobiologist in the newspaper opined, "Stewart used to do good work, but now she's gone senile. She doesn't know what she's doing. We're saving lives with..."
Dude, this is so funny. It just reminds me, I was just reading comments under, I mentioned him in the Max Stupid video, this guy Peter Schiff. Peter Schiff has called out a lot of financial frauds in the past, and he's calling out Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy right now. And all the comments under it are like, exactly like this, like, "Bro, you used to be good at calling out this stuff, like, but you've totally lost it." Like, you used to know what you're fucking talking about, but when it comes to this shit, you're so fucking stupid. And it's like, yeah, it happens to CoffeeZilla too. I mean, I've got it. I got people who are always like I got people who, if I'm making fun of Hawk Tua coin or something, they'll be like, "Ah, yeah, it's fucking hilarious. Love you, Atrioc, love the content." And then if I make fun of GameStop, they'll be like, "You just don't get it. You don't get it. Like, rare L take, Atrioc, but you just don't understand." People just, they won't, I don't know. They won't apply the logic. They enjoy it when it's something unrelated to them, but they can't.
X-rays. Plus, X-rays are cool. Since their invention in the 1890s, everyone was using X-rays for all sorts of novelty factors. Step right up to X-Ray World, the greatest theme park this side of the Massatucky River. Get your bones X-rayed for cheap. No undressing required.
Oh, the same thing is going to happen with the election, too. Whenever I call out economic stuff in America when Biden is president, I had people calling me out who are Democratic supporters, and after the election, after Trump, give it 5 months, I'm going to get the exact same opposite. It's going to be like, wow, this guy fucking doesn't get it. It's just going to be, it's going to be just reverse people. And then people that disagree with me before are going to agree with me suddenly. People that were totally like, "You don't understand, you're not fucking looking at the right data," are going to be like, "Damn, you're actually right, you're spitting." It's going to be a total flip. It's insane.
You there, sir. Need a new heel for your shoe? Try on special X-ray photoscope, see? They don't have that in Shelbyville. Got an injury? We'll X-ray you for free and see if it helps. It probably won't, but there are no side effects. Got back pain? Try the latest cure from the Netherlands, blasting your spine with radiation. Only 20% of our patients die of cancer.
What? My mom remembers the whole X-ray your feet for shoe fittings? They used to X-ray your feet for shoe fittings? Why? You don't need to see the inside of the foot to... You can get your shoe fitted without X-raying it. What a fucking crazy gimmick.
Guaranteed. Society was truly addicted to getting their bones scanned. and hearing that they could be bad for you must have felt like learning roller coasters give you polio. But year after year, more and more studies, better studies with more funding, were published that confirmed what Dr. Stewart and her team knew all along.
I feel bad for her.
X-raying babies causes cancer. It wasn't until 30 years later, in 1980, when American medical groups recommended that doctors avoid X-raying pregnant women unless absolutely necessary. Before then, 266,000 pregnant women were X-rayed every year, increasing their child's risk of cancer by up to 5 times. In 1997, Richard Doll finally retracted his response paper and admitted that...
In 1997? Fuck you! Fuck you, dude! Holy God, that's like fucking 40 years later! What a fuck!
Stewart had been right all along. But by then, it was too late. His legacy as the doctor who linked lung cancer to cigarettes was already cemented, and his reputation could not be ruined. And millions of unborn children across the world had been...
Dude, he didn't want his big fucking scoop getting scooped, dude. He figured out that lung cancer is connected to cigarettes, and he didn't want someone to be like, oh, but x-rays are connected with cancer, and then he gets his thunder stolen. He needed fucking 30 years.
Given an unsafe dose of radiation. But this story is not even close to the worst blunder on this list.
Do you think he's a net positive for the cigs thing? I mean, people are still smoking. Smoking's on a comeback. Like, whether we know it or not. You see, with child cancer and x-rays, they can ban it. Or they can tell doctors not to use it, and doctors won't use it. But you could tell people cigarettes cause cancer, and they go, that's a problem for future me. That's a problem for me in 20 to 30 years, okay? I'm going to fucking smoke right now, and I'm going to enjoy the hell out of it.
In fact, it wasn't even the biggest medical blunder of 1956.
The deadliest game of golf.
The year was 1955. All was well in America. The economy was up, the horrors of World War II were long behind, and people still had the decency to say hello on the street. But all was not well in the Cherry Hills Golf Club in Denver, Colorado. President Dwight Eisenhower was enjoying a nice game of golf one afternoon when he suddenly complained of indigestion. He was determined to continue his day as usual, but throughout the afternoon his pain only worsened, and Eisenhower was soon hospitalized in...
I'm sorry, this reminds me of something that I have to tell you guys about. I have to tell you about this. We're pausing in the middle, I have to tell you about this, and I have to find you an audio clip. This is... this blew my mind. I was... Wait, please hold up. Just please hold for a second.
I have to disappoint you. 1.
Okay. Oh, it's gonna be hard to find this. You're gonna have to give me 1 second. But let me set the stage. Let me set the stage. So this is just give me 1 second. Just hold up over 1 second. 1 second. Okay, I'll give you just the right. This is Alexei Navalny. Okay, if you don't know who he is, he's probably the fiercest political opponent to Putin in Russia. He's now dead, understandably. But he spent years and years and years trying to reduce corruption in Russia, to run against Putin, to expose corruption. He had an incredible YouTube channel, which I highly recommend. Go check out some of those videos, where they did one of the most brilliant pieces of, how do I describe it? Like anti-corruption expose for the public where they would literally show like Russian ministers with like $1 million watches and then their official salary. They would be just like, one thing I super highly value is finding a way to take something complex and making it understandable to regular people who are just busy. Okay? He did that with Russian corruption. He made it understandable to regular people enough they felt motivated and angry enough to actually vote against Putin, which is very difficult because it's very demoralizing, right? I mean, he controls everything and everything's corrupt and you just feel like, I don't give a shit. It was remarkably effective. It's one of his most brilliant aspects, I think, is the ability to like do a wide scale, using the internet, tell a story, a counter narrative to the official one. It's very cool. Okay? Anyway, obviously because of this, there's a lot more I can go about Navalny, and maybe I should do a whole video on him, but I'm gonna do a quick one here. Because of this, he was targeted by Putin. Okay? Obviously Putin wanted him killed. And 1 week after a particularly good video had been uploaded, got a few million views exposing corruption, I guess Putin had enough and it authorized him to be killed. So Navalny at the airport drinks some tea and he's photographed drinking this tea and people think the tea was poisoned. We don't know exactly what happened. He gets on the plane and while he's on the plane, he starts to feel a little unwell. He just feels a little off. Now I knew all of this, okay? But I'm interested in this guy. And so I bought his autobiography that he wrote before he died. He died in prison, by the way. I bought his autobiography and I was listening to it. I do audiobooks on flights. I was listening to the audiobook in his own words on the flight back from Japan. Okay? And he says a sentence about his world famous nerve agent Novichok poisoning on a flight that I could never in a million, billion, trillion years have expected. And I'm going to pull it up for you. He says a sentence that I don't think you'll ever expect. I'm going to mute it till I find it. No, he can speak English, first of all, and he did it in English. Is my understanding. So, yeah, I found it. Hold. 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 Okay, here it is. Well, listen to the whole part, all right? This is so fucking wild. Remember, this guy is like one of the most insane political figures in all of Russia, and he's talking about his real life or death experience.
Russia. I'm generally happy to chat with people, just not on a plane. There's always a lot of background noise, and I really don't relish the prospect of having a face 20 centimeters away shouting at me, "You investigate corruption, right? Well, let me tell you my case." Russia is built on corruption.
Hold.
And everyone has a case. My mood, already great, gets even better as I look forward to 3.5 blissful hours of complete relaxation. First, I'll watch an episode of Rick and Morty, then read. I fasten my seatbelt and take off my sneakers. The plane starts moving down the runway. I delve into my backpack, take out my laptop and headphones, open the Rick and Morty folder, and choose a season at random, then an episode. I'm in luck again. This is the one where Rick turns into a pickle. I love it. A passing flight attendant looks askance.
Dude, my fucking jaw dropped on the plane. I was like, had tears in my eyes. It was so out of left field because the first 15 minutes of this is the opening chapter is him talking about his like brutal fight for corruption and what it all means. And then it's just the Pickle Rick episode of Rick and Morty pops out. And so as he's watching Pickle Rick, he starts to feel the nerve agent destroying his fucking brain. Like he's like, my heart feels fine, my legs feel fine, but I feel like my entire brain is being DDoSed. And he's watching Rick and Morty Pickle Rick. It is insane. What a world. It's so beautiful. It's so wild. It's as if the episode itself rotted his brain from within. Maybe he didn't have a high enough IQ to understand it. Is it possible? Is it possible the reason he collapsed in this seat is because he couldn't, and it wasn't Putin's fault at all? Anyway, I had to share that with you. That it truly was like a incredible, an incredibly unexpected moment. Because I've known about Navalny forever. I mean, like, but I wanted to hear, his story about what happened. And it is a fascinating book, by the way. I do recommend it. I recommend the audiobook. Usually I don't recommend the audiobook, but I thought it was quite good. And it definitely exposes the corruption in Russia, which everyone knows about, but in more incredible detail. How did the vid remind you of that? He was talking about indigestion and not feeling well. And then I suddenly got a flashback to remembering Navalny telling the stewardess that he wasn't feeling well while watching Pickle Rick. He also pirated Pickle Rick. So yeah, good point. I'm not saying he deserved to be poisoned, but like, I can see why Putin was trying to keep the peace in his country. He wanted to stop crime. He didn't want people to pirate a great show like Rick and Morty. He maybe went too harsh with the death penalty, but anyway, also worth spoiling here. He did not die from that nerve agent. He incredibly, against all odds, as a miracle, survives, even though he feels the effects while on a plane that can't land. And then continues fighting against Putin, and then eventually is jailed and died in prison, which is horrendously sad, but he is inspiring to many. Do you think he finished the ep? Well, he mentioned it was one of his favorites, so I assume he's watched that ep many times, as we all have. I can't imagine any of us goes even a few days without rewatching Pickle Rick to understand its deep nuance. Anyway, all right, play this.
In the late evening. The diagnosis? A massive...
Okay, so catching back up, Eisenhower, president at the end of World War II. President after World War II, I'm sorry. General World War II. On the golf course, gets sick, heart attack. Boom.
Heart attack. Luckily, he survived, but was bedridden for several weeks. The public were worried. The stock market tanked and had its worst day since the start of World War II. Congress questioned...
Dude, imagine the stock market responding to the president feeling sick. Bro, Joe Biden's 1 foot in the grave right now, and we're at fucking all-time highs.
If he was still fit to serve. The President of the United States suddenly dying during the Cold War was a potential weakness that could be exploited by the enemy. Eisenhower's doctors scrambled to examine everything about the president's lifestyle to try and determine the cause. And he wasn't alone. Heart attacks were the biggest killer of men in America at the time, at a rate many times higher than in the 1920s. What was going on? One man said he had the answer. Dr. Ansel Keys of the University...
Dr. Incel? I have to go to the bathroom. 1 second. Okay, let's see what Dr. Incel has to do. So what happened here? Wait, I'm sorry.
One man said...
They're studying Eisenhower's heart attack, so he doesn't crash the economy.
He had the answer. Dr. Ansel Keys of the University of Minnesota. Keys looked at the average American diet and concluded it was fat. Half of the president's diet was meat and dairy. High-fat foods, which, according to the food pyramids that adorn the walls of every biology classroom...
Isn't the food pyramid, like, enormously wrong? Isn't the food pyramid 100% just rotten to the core and stupid? Yeah, it's like all bread. The core of every diet should be enormous amounts of bread. Ideally, Wonder Bread.
In the world is bad for you. His proof? A study of 5,000 people living in Italy, Greece, Yugoslavia, Finland, the Netherlands, Japan, and the United States. And look, the more fat they ate, the more unhealthy they were. undeniable proof. Keyes recommended that we cut this fat from 50% of our diet to 10% and replace the gap with carbohydrates and sugar. Some scientists, such as John Yudkin, weren't convinced. They said that too much sugar could be deadly, arguing that if any other ingredient was found to be half as deadly as sugar, it would promptly be banned as a health hazard.
But we love sugar, Yancet! You fucking buzzkill! God, I love sugar. I love cookies. I love candy. No one loves sugar as much as me. I love Golden Grams. God damn, sugar is good.
Lancet, a prominent medical journal, sounded the alarm too. Although fat is bad in high quantity,
I eat a pound of sugar every day straight from the bag. Least diabetic American. Sort of reining it in, actually.
the cure should not be worse than the disease. 1 meat plus 2 vegetables had been the standard meal for decades in the West. Diet-wise, the 1950s were the healthiest Europeans and Americans had been before or since. Sugar had only recently arrived in large quantities in our diet 300 years ago. But we've been eating fat since humans first roamed the earth. Now things were changing. Diets switched from this to this. Sugary, carby treats stocked the shelves of grocery stores. Also, why did you exclude France and Germany from your study? These countries eat a lot of fat and no sugar, and they don't have high heart attack rates. Your study doesn't account for lifestyle differences, and wait, did you forget to test the low-fat diet on a single woman? But Keyes was extremely argumentative. He would debate anyone about anything, anytime, anywhere. When criticised at all, he would always respond, I studied 5,000 people.
I feel like this guy's problem is that he lived before Reddit. God damn it, he could have been such a great Redditor. He could have been one of the greatest. He could have been one of the greatest. He could have been truly Dr. Incel, the highest karma farmer in the world.
How many people did you study? Meanwhile, Yudkin was a mild-mannered Englishman who wasn't all that good at sticking up for himself. He was accused of being a shill for the meat and dairy industry. His work was derided as science fiction by the World Sugar Research Organization. Keyes' larger-than-life personality, plus a few bribes from the sugar industry, won the scientific world over to his theory of fat being bad, sugar and carbs being good. The first US dietary advice was published in 1980, with many countries copying this advice and giving it to their own population. For the first time in nutrition history, it was recommended to eat less of something rather than an equal amount of everything. And the effects have been disastrous.
Yeah.
Before the dietary advice was published, 15% of Americans and 10% of Europeans were classed as obese. Those figures are now over 35 and 25% respectively. By 2030, it's estimated half of Americans will be considered obese. The epidemic of obesity costs the world $1.2 trillion annually. Hundreds of thousands of people...
Just invest in Fartcoin. We'll make that back in no time.
In America alone die of obesity-related causes every year, and heart disease is the biggest killer. In 2008, an Oxford University study finally proved that there was no link between saturated fat and heart disease. France, the country with the highest intake of saturated fat in Europe, had the lowest rate of heart disease. Ukraine, the country with the lowest intake of saturated fat, had the highest. Other organizations such as the United Nations and the University of California have corroborated this. But even though Dr. Keyes' fat theory has been disproven, it's going to be really difficult to undo the damage he did to public education around food.
Fuck you, Dr. Keyes!
Our dietary preferences have already changed. Supermarkets have already altered their recipes to conform to the false dietary advice. Cultural perceptions around the word fat have associated it with getting fat, while carbs are seen as a source of energy that keeps us going. Low fat is touted as a selling point on various food items. But most importantly, government diet advice, which every department from schools to hospitals to...
I mean, it's kind of just bad branding, though. You know what I'm saying? I think it's very natural. Like if you were designing a game and like there was food with mana in it and you thought it would fill your mana bar, you know, it just makes sense. Like if there's fat in the food, people think you'll get fat. That does make sense. We should rebrand it. It should be called like mana. It should be called mana. Like it should be a high mana food. That'd be cool as hell. And then everyone thinks they have to fill their mana bar so they eat at least a good amount of fat. I could solve a lot of problems.
Agriculture relies on is slow to update. When Yudkin testified before the Senate Committee on Healthy Living, Senator George McGovern asked him if he really believed that sugar was bad and fat was okay. "I believe that, yes," replied Yudkin. "That is exactly the opposite of what my doctor told me," said McGovern. So what should we be eating? The Harvard School of Public Health has proposed an alternative to the now outdated food pyramid. It's the healthy eating plate. It's more or less a return to the old dietary advice of eating an equal amount of everything and keeping sugar to a minimum. These days, the media likes to blame advertising, television, lack of self-control, or fast food companies as a reason why everyone is so unhealthy these days. But the real answer is because of one heart attack and one opportunistic doctor 70 years ago. So what did cause Eisenhower to have that heart attack? It was smoking. Eisenhower smoked 3 packs of cigarettes per day.
Nobody checked that. Bro is doing 3 packs a day and we're like, nah, it's probably his fucking diet. He probably needs to eat more sugar. That's funny.
It was in the midst of the Napoleonic Wars when French inventor Philippe de Girard developed a new way of storing food for long periods of time.
Okay.
He sealed the uncooked meal into a metal container and then heated the container over a fire for 6 hours. This prevented the food inside from spoiling for months or even years. He had invented tinned food. As we all know, tinned food has revolutionized the way we consume our meals.
Yeah, can of beans.
Philippe certainly deserved the riches and fame that would have stemmed from his groundbreaking achievement.
Oh, no.
But it was not to be. During that time, the patent system in France was nationalized. If you had a cool idea, you sent it to the French Academy. They would forcibly take your invention and would only compensate you if they thought the idea was any good. In this case, they didn't like it that much, and Philippe received nothing. And this was the mistake that set off the chain reaction. Annoyed that he had been passed over, he travelled to England in the hope of getting a higher price for his invention. Britain had a more modern patent system. Whoever filed the patent was allowed to make as much money as they wanted from it. There was a more entrepreneurial spirit. Philippe sold his tinned food patent for £1,000 to manufacturers Donkin and Hall, who then started mass-producing canned meals for the Royal Navy and other shipping companies. For 300 years, the diet of sailors had been salted meat.
Oh, they gave him £1,000 and then got endless government contracts for food forever, making millions and millions and millions and millions and millions.
And biscuits, and malnutrition was the biggest cause of death in the industry. Now, a variety of food could be kept in the hold for much longer. Sailors' health improved, and it helped cement the Royal Navy's role in making Britain the global superpower of the 19th century. The smaller size of the cans meant that you could fit thousands of pre-made meals in the ship's hold, allowing for longer and more direct voyages. More importantly, it means ships can make journeys of multiple legs without having to stop every few weeks to restock supplies. This kicked off a wave of exploration, like over northern Canada, around Antarctica, and most crucially, across the Pacific, the largest ocean on the planet. These long journeys inspired explorer and biopirate Henry Wickham to smuggle 70,000 rubber trees from Brazil under the guise of scientific specimens.
Okay.
Mountains of canned food allowed his crew to avoid stopping off anywhere, bypassing customs who might find the stolen seeds, and sailing directly to British-occupied Southeast Asia.
Okay.
He then sold the rubber seeds for a ridiculous markup price. The highly organised and ruthlessly efficient Asian rubber plantations vastly outperformed their South American counterparts, making everyone involved very rich.
Okay.
Within a year, Brazil's monopoly on rubber had snapped like an elastic band. Although it wasn't the empire's biggest money-making scheme, it produced a nice rainy day fund and reduced reliance on South America.
Okay.
Until, of course, the Japanese invaded Malaya and Burma in 1941,
World War II again.
taking the industry for themselves. Now, the only source of rubber that the Allies had access to was in the colony of Ceylon, which is now modern Sri Lanka. And Sri Lanka wasn't producing enough to meet demand for all the tyres, tank treads, raincoats, and other important things that the war required.
Okay.
Allied scientists were directed to find an alternative way to make liquid rubber go further without it losing its stretchy elastic properties. For months, scientists melted down anything plasticky and added it to the liquid rubber to see what would happen. But nothing worked.
That's science, baby.
Until 1943, when a team at Harvard University added gasoline to the mixture. And this is the culmination of mistakes that started with the French Academy denying Philippe de Girard a reward for his invention of canned food. Because gasoline and rubber creates...
Okay, but that's kind of... This is a stupid... I mean, all these stories are really cool, but the way they make them out to start at some random mistake is dumb. Oh, I'm still lolling. I'm still laughing. You can tell in my fucking camera face. Because if whether or not the French denied his patent, someone would have started making canned food. If they accepted it, then they would have done it in France, but they would have done it in UK either way. And then it would have caused longer boat trips, which would have caused someone to escape with rubber plants.
Napalm.
Oh, shit! Yeah, it's just like interesting history facts wrapped up in a gimmick for YouTube. I get it. It's great. It's actually great. I have no problem with this video. You figured out a way to package it so that it is a good, catchy title and thumb, and then it's mostly just interesting. Yeah, it's just marketing. I get it.
This is Teresa Lepore, the election supervisor for Palm Beach County in the state of Florida.
Okay.
Elected in 1996, she was responsible for designing the ballot for the upcoming 2000 presidential election. To save on pens, paper, and ink, voters in this part of Florida slide their ballot into this cover and then punch a hole in the ballot to indicate their vote. This election, there were a lot of candidates, so instead of putting the candidates all down the side, Lepore designed the ballot like this and made the text bigger. Palm Beach is full of elderly, short-sighted retirees. So let's meet the candidates. Up first is Republican George Bush, and to vote for him, you punch the first hole marked with an arrow and the number 3. Okay. Second is Democrat Al Gore. To vote for him, you punch the third hole marked with the number 5. Wait, why? Oh, right. So over here you have the third? Or is it 7th candidate? Pat Buchanan of the Reform Party, a radical centrist party that actually did quite well in previous elections, which is why they're listed at the top with the big dudes. And to vote for him, you punch the second hole marked with the number 4. Confused? The elderly half-blind retirees certainly were. 19,000 ballots were punched more than once by voters, over 6 times as many as in the previous election. Furthermore, votes for the Reform Party were unusually high in Palm Beach, more than 3 times the average for all the other counties in the state of Florida. An otherwise honest mistake. Except by improbable coincidence, the ballots of Palm Beach County were the deciding factor in the election, because the Electoral College hinged entirely on Florida. 537 votes in Florida. And Lepore's terrible ballots were in the middle of it all. Is it really that difficult to believe at least 15% of those 3,400 votes were punched wrong accidentally? Even Buchanan himself said it was easy to get confused after seeing the ballot design. In fact, when Florida re-examined those ballots with multiple punches, they found that if they accepted ballots with 1 partially punched hole and 1 fully punched hole, Gore had actually won Florida by at least 60 votes. But you know by now that this definition was not accepted. Bush won and subsequently became the 41st president of the United States. I don't need to hammer home how bad President Bush was. He sits at the bottom of the pile for presidential approval.
He had an excellent golf drive. He had an excellent pitch. He could dodge a shoe. Imagine Al Gore wins and does exactly the same things as Bush in every way, including invading Iraq, but gets hit by the shoe. Throws a stinker first pitch. Says, now watch this drive, and then hits a stinker. Yikes, America would be way worse off. Instead of mission accomplished banner, without having won anything, it's a mission failed banner. Yikes, dude. We could be in the best timeline. We don't know.
Ratings, along with such classics as Richard Nixon and controversy-free, wholesome family man. More important than what Bush did was what he didn't do. The 90s was the first decade in where climate change was starting to be taken seriously by governments in the developed world, and the United States was no exception. In 97, during the Clinton administration, the United States signed onto the Kyoto Protocol, a legally binding treaty among the world's biggest polluters to cut their carbon emissions.
Treaties written in Japan are not legally binding. Sorry to be the man with the facts, but it's true. If you write something in Japan, it doesn't actually, you can't be held to it. Okay? It's simply performance art.
Below the 1990 levels. This was to be achieved through a variety of measures, such as increasing the use of renewable energy and improving energy efficiency. Al Gore was a vocal advocate for action on climate change. He had even written a book about it in 1992, which he outlined his vision for addressing the issue. But after Bush's election, the picture could not be more different. He questioned the very existence of man-made climate change. The planet is warming, sure, but human activity doesn't have anything to do with it, said the President's Council on Environmental Quality, which was staffed full of lobbyists from the oil and gas industry, an industry that had known that human activity does, in fact, have anything to do with it since at least the 1980s. The Bush administration quickly pulled out of the Kyoto Agreement, refusing to play an active role in any United Nations climate conferences for the next 8 years. And this certainly mattered. 25% of the world's carbon emissions at the time were caused by the United States. Any climate deal rested on whether the Americans would play ball. Had Gore been elected and followed through on his plan to tackle the issue, it's possible that the course of climate change could have been altered. Instead, the election set the stage for 2 decades of inaction on the issue. As global temperatures rise, water supplies will dwindle, leading to crop failures and water shortages in the most vulnerable places in the world. Those who don't die of dehydration or starvation might move northwards in search of cooler, more secure nations, creating a crisis the likes of which the world has never seen. Those who do stay will be forced to compete for increasingly limited resources in overpolluted hellholes, Lesser developed countries might even go to war with each other over access to water. Already, tensions between Egypt and Ethiopia are strained over a proposed dam which Egypt claim will cut off crucial supplies to the Nile, the source of water for nearly all Egyptians. Conflict aside, the mortality cost of the carbon we are putting into the air could be responsible for killing over 1 million people every year by the end of the century. 80 million in total. In the past 3 decades, 37% of all heat-related deaths
straight
were
down
caused
the middle.
by a warming climate.
Straight down the
Up to
middle.
half in Southeast Asia.
Right onto the green.
Even if you don't believe
Tell him to bring out my
climate change
putter.
is real, in my dad's lifetime, half of all wildlife on Earth has been wiped out by human activity. That's not a good thing. Teresa's mistake will echo not just for the rest of the century as we cope with the fallout from conflict in the Middle East, but also the next 1,000 years. The climate has irreversibly changed in a way that could have been slowed or prevented had the United States taken action sooner and not pulled out of Kyoto. In the subsequent months and years, Lepore received mountains of hate, accusing her of causing all of Bush's mistakes. She had to be escorted to and from work by the county sheriff after her car's
ceremonial
tires
first
had been
pitch.
slashed. Al Gore's
please welcome
Vice President,
the
Joe
President
Lieberman, was so pissed
of the
off
United
that he
States.
personally went to Florida to campaign against Lepore when he was up for re-election, urging voters to vote for the Republican instead. But was Teresa entirely to blame? Probably not. All parties involved agreed to the ballot design. There were many faults in the Gore campaign that lost him key votes. The careless electorate of Palm Beach share some of the blame, and of course, it's impossible to say whether Al Gore would have been a good president or not. His party didn't control Congress at the time, limiting what he could have done.
Folks.
But unlike the other events discussed in this video, we can still fix the problem. Many of these projected events haven't even happened yet. Action can and is taking place to mitigate the damage. That million people per year? That's only the most pessimistic scenario. By following the path we are currently on, we could potentially reduce that figure by 90%. If we go above and beyond what is promised, we could even achieve a net saving of lives. And while the little things you're told to do, like turning off the lights or recycling, won't make a difference in the grand scheme of things, and it's worth noting, is literally fossil fuel industry propaganda, that doesn't mean you can't do anything at all. This whole video has shown that anyone with a modicum of power or status can inadvertently alter the course of history.
What I'm hearing is that we should accept every patent. Don't question heart attacks. Anytime a scientist says something, roll with it. And don't can food. Yes, exactly. And we won't get into these problems. We'll have no negative ways. That was a good video. I found it to be very interesting.